Hey guys, so I know you've probably been wondering where I've been, but after the last video or presentation I did with Google Slides, I was very concerned that this was going to be way too long of a series. And there's just like so much information that um, I was worried that it was gonna just be like way too much, you know. And so I figured like probably the best way for you guys to understand the the scope of this work and how large it really is. I went through the pains of creating this spreadsheet here. You know, it's titled World Chronology from Adam to Christ. And I covered pretty much from the beginning of creation the uh, to the final judgment. And you know, as I showed you guys like in the earlier parts of my presentation, on that there's only 5,500 years from the beginning of the world to the death of Christ on the cross. And yeah, like I said, trying to get all that information like condense and streamline on Google Sheets. I was like, oh, this is just like getting way too long. And I did not want to extend it any longer than I needed. So I pretty much created this spreadsheet here so you could add up the years for yourselves and look at it as a reference material. And I'll leave my email in the description box below so you guys can shoot me an email if you want me to share it with you and add you guys as viewers. Okay? So, this is how it all looks like, okay? Like zoomed all the way out. Now, when we zoom in, um, you'll notice here at the top, okay, it's titled, there's the title, World Chronology from Adam to Christ. And then here in the first column, I just listed the number or the cardinal order of the rulers from first to last. So you have God, okay, in column B, he is the first ruler. And then if you scroll all the way down, okay, I have Christ labeled as the last ruler, okay? So that's because God created the world and everything in it, okay? Authority began with him. And when it ends with Christ, okay, during that time, so during this time here, it's going to be 6,000 years from the world. And that will be the beginning of Christ's millennial kingdom. He'll reign for 1,000 years. And, that'll bring us to the year 7,000 from the world. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to show you guys is so here in column C, you have the number of years that have passed from one ruler to the next. Okay. And then column D, these are the Anno Mundi or Year of the World timeline. So you also get to see how many years passed from the creation of the world on down to like a particular event or ruler. Okay. So you get to you know so in other words, here in column C, I should say, correct myself. So this is when like either a person like begat like their son or they began to rule. Okay. So here in column E, we have the Greek Olympiads. Okay. And as you can see, they don't start for a long time. And the Ab Urbi Condita in column F, That is Latin for from the building of the city, and they start shortly after the first Olympiad. Okay, those count the years from the time that Romulus built Rome. Okay, while the Olympiads in column E keep track of the years from the first Olympic Games. Okay, and those occur every 4 years, um, according to the tradition of the Greeks. Now, in column G, we have the Anno Domini because obviously that timeline was made much more later, or much later in history. And then in columns H, we have the giant statue. This refers to the statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed of and had Daniel interpret. Okay, so you got the head of gold, okay, silver, thighs of bronze, and the legs of iron. And then at the bottom, feet of iron mixed with clay. All right. Now, similarly with these beasts, Daniel had a vision of 4 beasts. And then in column J, we have the kingdoms listed, which, they correlate with the beast, the 4 beasts, and the statue. Okay, so as you can see here, the head of gold correlates with the first beast, who is the lion, which is Babylon. And then the arms of chest and silver correlate with the second beast, who Daniel saw was a 4-headed leopard with 4 wings, or excuse me, a bear lying on its side with 3 ribs in its mouth. Okay, so that's the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. And then you have the belly and thighs of bronze, which is the third beast, which is the 4-headed leopard with the 4 wings that I talked about. That is Greece. And then you have the legs of iron, which is the fourth beast, which is connected to the Romans. And then finally, you have the feet of iron mixed with clay, and that is still the fourth beast. Okay, and that is still Rome. Now, all the way here on this end, we have Mystery Babylon, who I put as Jerusalem because in the book of Revelation, we are told that Mystery Babylon is the great harlot who rides the beast. Okay, so the beast that she's riding has 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, just like the beast who comes out of the sea, and also just like the red dragon, who is, representative of Satan. And also the fourth beast that Daniel dreams of also has 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, so they're all connected to one another. They're all talking about the same beast. Okay, now Mystery Babylon is Jerusalem because Revelation clearly tells us that she drank the blood of the saints, and that she sits on a city built on 7 hills, and it's the place where that is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where our Lord was crucified. Okay, that's how we know it's Jerusalem, because that's the only place in history and in Scripture where Christ was crucified, in Jerusalem. All right. So then after that, we already went over this. This is the millennial kingdom of Jesus Christ here. Okay. So Christ is gonna be the final ruler. Okay. He's going to come right after the Great Tribulation, which you can read of clearly in Matthew 24, where Christ clearly says towards the end of Matthew 24 that after the tribulation, that's when he will appear. Okay, so that is the great tribulation is set to occur 5996.5 or 5996 and 6 months after the creation of the world. Okay, 3.5 years later brings us to 6,000. That's when Christ will return. Um, and then he'll rule for 1,000 years. So 1,000 plus 6,000 brings us to 7,000. Okay, that's the true Sabbath right there. And then after that, you have the final judgment. Okay, so that is like really the big picture and the quick and dirty rundown of this chart here. So now going a little bit more into detail. Now, how I arrived at these BC years, okay, we know that BC are the number of years before Christ's birth, and then AD are the number of years from the time Christ is born up to the present time, okay? So here in column G, all right, I set the birth of Christ at 5470 BC. Why did I do that? Because Scripture prophesied that Christ would die 5,500 years from the world. Okay? So that brings us to 30 AD, which is 5,500 years from the world, in the 15th year of Tiberius, as Scripture tells us in Luke 3. Okay? So these numbers already imply that Christ did not have a 3.5 year ministry, but rather a 1 year or less ministry. Okay? And that occurred in the 202nd Olympiad and 780 years after Rome was built. Okay? So since we're able to figure out that Christ died 5,500 years from the world and he was 30 years old, 5,500 minus 30 gives you the creation year of 5470 BC. So that's how I arrived at that. Okay? Now, the rest of these years you figure out by simply adding up. Okay? And again, you guys can just request this file to use as a reference material and check the numbers that I have put forth here for yourselves. Okay? Now, to explain where I got the information from, so from God when he created the world all the way to the flood during the days of Noah. Okay, you can get those numbers from Genesis 5, okay? And then from Shem all the way to the time that Terah had Abraham, or you could even say to the 75th year of Abraham. You can find that in Genesis 11. And then really from there, from the time Abraham gave birth to Isaac at 100 years old, all the way to the time that Moses freed Israel in his 80th year. Well, you have to go through the rest of the book of Genesis, and I think you go up to Exodus 12 or 14 to get the rest of those numbers. Okay? And then, to go from Moses all the way to Samuel, who is the final judge of Israel, well, you got to read the rest of Exodus, and you got to read the whole book of Judges to get these numbers. But again, I had to painstakingly do that, and plot out the numbers correctly. So that way, and reason everything out, And then from Saul all the way to Madaniah or Zedekiah, when the Jews were taken captive into Babylon, you have to literally go through the book of 1 Samuel all the way to to the end of Second Chronicles. Okay, to get all of these numbers. And then with Nebuchadnezzar all the way to Cyrus the Great, again, you would get those numbers towards the end of like Second Kings and Second Chronicles. And then also, I think like towards the end of the book of Jeremiah, you can find these numbers. And I think even in Isaiah you could find it, but definitely towards the end of Second Kings, Second Chronicles, and the end of Jeremiah, that's where I had to find these numbers. Now, to figure out the number of years between Cyrus the Great to Alexander the Great, to the end of his 12-year reign, what I had to do from there is start tracking the Olympiads. So I had to first find out what year on the Anno Mundi timeline would the first Olympiad have occurred. And before I was able to do that, I was like, okay, well, I had to figure out what Olympiad Christ died in. And so after going through the works of Jerome and Eusebius, they both said that Christ died in the 202nd Olympiad. And they both quoted from this ancient Greek writer known as Phlegon, who wrote this large work titled The Olympiad. So he listed like every single Olympiad in the history of Greece down to his own time. And, he recorded that the earthquake that occurred at the time of Christ's death and, the blocking out of the sun, that occurred in the 202nd Olympiad. Okay. So once I found that out, then it was pretty easy for me to do the rest. So, well, see, I'm like almost getting lost in the detail here, and this is why I got afraid to like really make more videos on this, because I really did not want to like wear you guys out. But pretty much when you check these numbers, you'll see, like, I'll show you an example. So from 5017, all the way here to to here to 5136, it's a difference of 119 years. 5017 minus 5136, so 119 years. And then from 5148 to 5017, that's 131. Okay, why is that? Because 119 years from Cyrus the Great to the beginning of Alexander's reign in the 111th Olympiad, and then you add the 12 years that Alexander reigned. Okay, that'll bring us to the close of the 114th Olympiad. So actually I need to put that here. So 111th. And I need to include Alexander's name next to Darius. stretch that out. Okay, that's better. So yeah, so that's the beginning of Alexander's reign. And then he reigned for 12 years, as we can see right there. So he died 5,148 years from the creation of the world in the 114th Olympiad, and that occurred 428 years after Rome was built. Okay, so as you could see here, okay, I have the first Olympiad. It occurred 4,692 years from the creation of the world. And then the foundation or building of Rome occurred 28 years later in the year 4720 from the creation of the world. Okay? So, in other words, as far as our Anno Domini timeline is concerned, the first Olympiad occurred in 778 BC, while Rome was built by Romulus in 750 BC. Okay? So, Alexander died 428 years after Rome was built in 322 BC. Okay? And that occurred 416 years after. And Alexander began to reign 416 years after Rome was built in 334 BC. Okay? There's quite a lot of work, as you could see. All right? Now, I had to use a similar method to figure out how much time passed from Alexander the Great to to the time that Augustus Caesar began to reign. And I use a similar method. So, since I knew Christ died 5,500, I just needed to know how many years that Augustus Caesar reigned, and I found that to be 57. Okay. And so pretty much I subtracted 72 years from the time of Christ's death to the time he was born. Okay, that gives you 5428. 5,500 minus 72, 5428. Okay, so Christ was born 5428 from creation in the 184th Olympiad, 708 years after Rome was built in 42, or excuse me, so I had that incorrect. So Augustus Caesar began to reign in 5428 after the creation of the world in the 184th Olympiad, 708 years after Rome was built in 42 BC. Now Christ, on the other hand, was born in the 42nd year of Augustus Caesar, 5470 from creation, in the second year of the 195th Olympiad, 750 years after Rome was built, in 0 BC/1 AD. Okay? Now, obviously, the Anno Domini timeline does not have a 0 AD, which is why I put 0 BC to show clearly that by the time Christ was born in 1 AD, there are no longer any more years to count before Christ's birth. Okay, he's already born. So 15 AD puts Christ at 15 years old, or which is 3 years after Mary and Joseph had accidentally left him behind in the temple. And then 30 AD is the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar's reign. And Christ was 30 years old, and he died in the 202nd Olympiad, 780 years after Rome was built. Okay? So that was quite a lot of work. But after figuring those out, okay, since I knew that Augustus Caesar began his reign in the 184th Olympiad, all I had to do was, and that was 5428 after creation. All I had to do was like, okay, 5428 minus 5148. So that gives you the 280 years that I have listed right there. Okay? As you guys could see, the numbers, they do add up, and it was a lot of work to go through. Now, these years here, from Tiberius onward, it was very difficult to track these down, because the only people who had like really big lists were Jerome, Eusebius, uh, and there's a guy by the name of Hippolytus, but his was actually kind of short. But yeah, like Jerome and Eusebius were like the two, and there's another guy, Saint Epiphanes. They were the main three who had like the hugest lists, and you know, like I had to go off of their lists and yeah, compare their numbers and plot them down. But pretty much from Tiberius all the way to the Roman Emperor Basiliscus, I was only able to account for 5,932 years passing from the creation of the world. But as far as how many years passed from the birth of Christ, that's only 462 years. Okay? So, that right there, since we know Christ is coming back in the year 6000, and I was only able to account for 5,932 years, that meant with those numbers, there were only 68 years before the second coming of Christ. Okay? Now, in my final video after this one, because I don't think I'm going to do any more on the timeline after this. This is just like way too much work. And I already had to go through a lot of trouble just getting all these numbers together. So if you guys want more information and you really care, just shoot me an email. I'll be glad to answer questions. But yeah, so in my final video after this one that I'll make, I pretty much I found a paper called Comparative Jewish Chronology. I think I have that file here still. Here it goes. So yeah, Comparative Jewish Chronology by Rabbi Simon Schwab. So here he wrote the paper in 5722 according to the modern Hebrew calendar, which is 1961 to 1962. So in this paper, he is like the only person who decides to tackle the discrepancy of the missing 166 years from the Jewish calendar. And if you guys want to read this, I will share this file with you guys as well if you want. And then you could read it in more detail. But yeah, so he doesn't, I don't want to go into the detail right now, but pretty much after seeing that he didn't do the proper corrections on his paper, I ended up doing the corrections, and I found out that we are in the year 5977 from the world. Okay, so I will show that, like I said, in my final video after this one. But yeah, so that this paper, like once I came across this paper, I was able to figure out the true year we're in. So 5977 minus 6000 means we only have 23 years left, okay, before Christ's second coming. And 19 and a half years before the beginning of the Great Tribulation, and 16 years before the Antichrist comes, and the third temple is rebuilt and the sacrifices are resumed. Okay? So going back to this large chart here, all right, pretty much, yeah, these numbers are showing us that with the public information available, 2,000 years have not passed from the birth of Christ to where we are today. And that, a little over 1,500 years have been added to our timeline. Okay? Because if you take our current year, 2021, and you subtract 476 from it, okay, which is the year supposedly that Rome fell, Western Rome anyways, that is a difference of 1,545 years, okay? Because if we take 5470, which is the time Christ was born, and we add 2,021 years to it, that puts us 491 years past the final judgment. And that has not passed yet, nor has Christ even come back yet. How do we know that? Because the Euphrates River is not completely dried up yet. Okay? The Euphrates River will be completely dry before the second coming of Christ. Okay? So all these different things have to line up, not just the numbers, but the prophetic and political events that need to transpire still. Now, when you subtract that 1545, that corrects and brings us to 5946, okay? Which is just 31 years off from, what I already concluded as the year we are in, truly. But, yeah. Let me go back here again to the chart. So, yeah, we've definitely been lied to on how much time has gone by. Now, as far as how that was, how that probably happened, well, I mean, definitely there are a lot of forgeries found during the period known as the Middle or Dark Ages. So that's one contribution. And then the other one is that, between like the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar, there's like a discrepancy of 347 years. Okay? And I'll just briefly show that to you guys. So you got 45 BC, right? That's represented by this negative number here. So that's when Caesar was supposed to have made the calendar reform and changed the Roman calendar from a lunar one to a solar one. Okay, that's where we get the 365.25 from him. And then in 1582, that's when the Gregorian calendar was introduced. Okay, so from 45 BC to 1582 AD, you just do 45 plus 1582. Okay, that's a time span of 1,627 years. Now, every 128 years, okay, you multiply that because it was found that there was a discrepancy of like 10 days. So over a 128-year period times 10 days, that that is 1,280. Okay, subtract that from 1627, and there goes your discrepancy of 347 years unaccounted for, right? So yeah, so that's one way. People messing around with the calendars, and that causes additions in time. And then the other way it was most probably done is that a lot of events which occurred in history at the same time were made to look as if they occurred one after the other in succession. Okay, so you in effect extend or stretch or elongate the the time from Christ to where we are today artificially, and you create this false history pretty much. So yeah, I haven't been able to track down every single instance because yeah, that was pretty much going past like my ability on this whole thing. I pretty much had reached the limit of my ability when doing this timeline, because that is beyond my pay grade, and the evidence I would have to gather and the materials I would need access to, I do not have the ability to access those things. So as far as what is available and what I have been able to get my hands on and understand what the ability God has given me, only 462 years have passed from the birth of Christ to the Roman Emperor Basiliscus, and 507 years have passed from the birth of Christ to where we are today in 2021. Okay? So 19 and a half years later brings us to the beginning of the reign of the Antichrist, who will rule for 3.5 years. Okay? And then after that 3.5 year period, Christ will be the last ruler of the world, and his millennial kingdom will begin. Okay? So Christ is set to come back in 2044. Okay? The Antichrist will come in 2040. Okay? So yeah, that is where we are, folks. And as you could see, this is a lot of information to go through that I had to sort through and organize. But again, after doing so, and getting everything in their proper order, 2,000 years have not passed from the birth of Christ to where we are today. We have been lied to. So that pretty much is that. I wish I could explain every single detail. I would love to, but again, I've pretty much reached the limits of my ability on this one here, and this is as far as I could get with what God has allowed me to know, and what He has revealed to me and has moved me to share with you all. So if you guys want to view this, or you want a copy to reference, oh boy, please feel free to email me. I will leave it in the description box below. But that is it for this video. So stay tuned for the final one on this world chronology. All right. Shalom, guys.